wasn't supposed to survive. He wasn't supposed to care. Silas Rowan rides slowly across the cracked plain near Sandstone Bluff, New Mexico, scanning a herd of cattle that drifted off during last night's cold wind. The air is brittle. The bluff juts like broken bone in the distance. That's when he sees it, a single cottonwood standing, twisted against the sky, a handmade sign nailed to its trunk, dripping bright scarlet letters. White man, don't forgive. Silas dismounts, heart pounding in that familiar way, half regret and half dread. He approaches the tree boots, crunching on grit and sun-baked clay. The sign swings gently, whispering hate in the wind. Then he sees the body, a young woman, hanging by her wrists, until her feet barely graze the dust. Her dress is tattered, stained with dust, and dark with dried blood. Her hair, mingled black and brown, clings to her face and neck. She is breathing, but so faintly that her chest rises and falls like a candle flicker on a gusty night. Silas's own breath catches in his chest. He knows the risk. Carry out a body, they might hunt him. Yet he steps forward all the same, his boots heavy like iron shackles. Carefully, he cuts the rope. Time lifts like a held breath as the woman collapses into his arms. She is warm, trembling, barely alive. He slides her gently to the ground, pressing his coat beneath her head. He loosens the crude fiber bindings at her wrists. Faint rope burns win their way across her flesh. Silas draws his canteen and pours water into his palm. He forces her lips open, her throat rasps in protest, but she drinks. The water trickles down her chin. He brushes grit from her cheek and watches her eyes, one fluttering, the other sealed by exhaustion. He mutters, "Hang in there, you're safe now." There is no quick answer, only the silence of standing still. Silas loosens the noose around the sign, letting it fall to the dusty ground. He hefts the soiled sign and steps away, tossing it onto the plastered porch of his modest ranch house, letting fate sit heavy in the dust. Inside the one-room house, he lays her on a cot lined with a patchwork blanket stitched by his late wife. The lantern light trembles across her face, revealing a scar on her left cheek, faint but reminiscent. Silas moves with slow kindness, brushing loose hair away, wetting a rag to clean her skin. He pauses when she flinches, whispers again, "I'm not going to hurt you, just helping." She is silent. He finds no name, no language, but in her eyes there is an ember. By the fire he pours stew into a bowl, thin, basic jerky, and beans, and brings it across. He sets one bowl near her and sits waiting. After minutes, she picks up the spoon with shaking fingers and eats. Not enough to fill her, but enough to choose life for a moment. Silas watches the embers glow. He glances at the sign in the corner, now burned and blackened from his attempt at burning. A memory stirs how he failed to save his own family when their ranch was attacked years ago. A sob catches in his throat, and he closes his eyes. He hears the soft rattle of her breathing grow steadier. He paces outside later, untying long coats from saddles, stacking firewood high against wind. The desert night opens with coyote cries and faint stars. He glances back at the shack where the faint shadow of the girl rests beneath the lantern. Dawn comes slowly. Silas finds her sitting just outside in the corner of the porch. Her posture is fragile, her eyes alert. He offers a bowl of dry biscuits and jerky. She tears a piece slowly. Her focus is unwavering. He doesn't ask questions. He only says, "You're safe now." She never responds. Silas takes that quiet affirmation as enough for now. He studies her features, cheeks, hollowed brow, set skin a warm bronze tone. There's something in her eyes, a heritage he recognizes from Apache bloodlines. She is not purely one world or the other. She belongs to both and neither. He inhales and watches the desert wind ripple across her hair. He pats the saddle, watches the horses grazing. Life is quiet again, save for her shallow breaths inside. Silas takes a cloth and gently covers her shoulders as the first rays of sun stretch across the bluff. He says softly, "What's your name?" No answer. He nods, eyes steady. "Then I'll call you Willa. For now." The name settles into the stillness like a seed in dry ground. Silas turns away to gather tools for the day, his silhouette framed by the rising sun. Beneath the cottonwood, a new scene lies, a girl who carried a message of hate, now saved by a man who chose mercy over fear. And the dust remembers. Under the wide New Mexico sky, Silas Rowan returned from a long day riding fence, dust streaking his boots, and sweat clinging to his collar. The windmill behind the ranch house turned slowly, creaking like an old song, its rhythm matching the quiet breath of life returning to the house. Inside, Willa sat on the edge of the cot shoulders wrapped in his old wool coat. She hadn't spoken yet. Not a word. But she was no longer just surviving. She was watching, breathing, being. Silas noticed small changes, the way she reached for the water now. Instead of flinching from it, the way she moved more like a shadow than a ghost. The silence between them wasn't empty anymore. It had begun to hum low and present like the wind through sagebrush. At night, he still gave her the cot and bedded down by the barn. She never asked for space, but he gave it anyway. One morning, he returned from checking the creek to find something etched into the dust outside the porch. A drawing, simple but intentional. A series of curved lines and arrows, ancient Apache markings, though Silas couldn't read them. Willa was sitting on the steps, face calm, hand smeared with dirt. She didn't look at him when he approached, just continued her work. He squatted beside her, careful not to erase the lines. "You do this?" he asked. She paused, nodded once. Silas stared at the marks. "What does it mean?" She looked at the horizon and whispered so soft he almost missed it. "Storm's path." Her voice was raw, unused, like boots cracking after too long in the sun. But it held weight, and Silas didn't respond right away. He just sat there next to the woman who hadn't spoken for days and listened to the wind press around them. From that moment, she began leaving more signs, little drawings in the dirt patterns scratched into leftover wood, small bundles of sage tied with thread and tucked above door frames. He didn't touch them, didn't question. He let the symbols live beside him as if the house was learning a new language. They shared meals now, simple ones, beans, cornbread, jerky. She never asked for more. He never pressed her for anything she didn't offer. One night, as the lantern light flickered across the cabin walls, Silas found her by the stove, turning over a piece of cloth he had used to clean the rifles. Her fingers moved like memory, measured, deliberate. She had once known how to sew, he realized, watching the way she studied the threads. Without asking, he brought her a needle and a scrap of canvas. The next morning, a shape began to form, an eagle, its wings frayed tail in flame. It startled him how familiar it looked. War paint, resistance. And yet there was grace in the lines, like the eagle was rising instead of falling. That afternoon, as Silas chopped wood behind the barn, Willa approached for the first time. No words, just her presence. He slowed, wiping sweat from his brow. She pointed to the horizon, where the clouds had begun to stack like iron anvils above the distant hills. "Bad air," she murmured. He followed her gaze. "Rain." She shook her head. Something else. Silas had lived long enough out here to know when something was off. The stillness wasn't peaceful. It was expectant. That night, he loaded his rifle and left it by the door. In the days that followed, Willa ventured farther, feeding the chickens, fetching water, sweeping the porch. Each action was quiet, precise, like a ritual. Sometimes she sang to herself, soft and breathless, in a tongue Silas didn't know. It sounded like wind through pine needles, or stones skipping across still water. He never interrupted her. Her voice seemed borrowed from somewhere holy. But with every moment of growth, a shadow lengthened behind them. Silas knew it. She knew it. They hadn't spoken of the sign he'd pulled from the tree. White man don't forgive, but its meaning hung over everything. Whatever had happened to her before, whoever had done it wasn't finished. One evening, he returned from town with salt grain and a bundle of clean fabric. Willa met him at the porch. Her eyes were different, still wary, but steady. She took the fabric, nodded once, and turned to the house. Inside, she set to work on a new stitch. Silas sat nearby, rolling tobacco slowly. "You always sew birds." She didn't answer at first. "Then my mother did." He nodded. "She teach you," Willa looked up, "before they burned her." The words were flat, factual, like a stone laid gently on a grave. Silas swallowed hard, unsure what to say. He watched her thread the needle again, steady as breath. Later that night, the windmill squeaked louder than usual. Silas stepped outside, hand resting on the rifle near the door. The wind carried the scent of iron and dust. He scanned the dark horizon. Nothing moved, yet he felt watched. Inside, Willa stirred in her sleep, muttering in her native tongue. Silas stood beside the cot, unsure whether to wake her. Instead, he draped a blanket across her and stepped back. She didn't flinch. The windmill groaned again. A single drop of rain struck the porch rail. Silas watched the clouds gather like wolves. A storm was coming, but not the kind with lightning. And inside the cabin, two people who barely spoke had begun building something wordless, something stronger than the boards beneath their feet. Something worth protecting, something worth running for. The days had settled into a rhythm, not of peace exactly, but of fragile understanding. Willa no longer avoided Silas's eyes. She moved around the ranch with growing confidence, her silence softened by presence alone. They did not speak often, but there was weight in the glances they shared, in the way he poured her coffee without asking, and how she set out his tools each morning without a word. But something in her shifted with the change in the air, as if a storm inside her had begun to stir. It happened one evening when the sky turned red with dust and the wind came in heavy from the mesa. Silas was closing up the barn when he saw Willa sitting alone beside the windmill, staring into the distance. Her shoulders were stiff. Her hands clenched around a strip of fabric she'd been embroidering for days. He approached quietly, letting the gravel crunch beneath his boots so she wouldn't be startled. She didn't look up, just said I had a name before Willa. Silas froze, not because of the words, but because of the way she said them, like peeling back a bandage that had sealed too tightly. My mother called me Ayasha. She continued, her voice a mix of pride and ache. It means, little one who was born in the morning light. My father, he called me Annie, said it made things easier for townfolk. Silas sat down beside her, watching the horizon where the last light clung to the tops of distant ridges. My mother was Apache, a healer. She grew herbs behind our hut and sang to the moon when no one was listening. My father was a trader, white from the east. He taught me to read and pray, but he never asked her to change. There was a long silence. The wind blew the embroidered cloth from her lap. She didn't reach for it. They used to call us peacekeepers, said our family was proof the two worlds could live as one. Her laugh came bitter brief. Then a white woman was found murdered on the ridge near our land. Her husband swore he saw one of us do it, though no one else believed him. Her fingers twisted in her skirt. The cavalry came before the sun rose, burned our tents, shot the old ones where they lay. My father tried to talk to reason. They tied him to the council tree and shot him first. Silas bowed his head. His hands trembled, resting useless in his lap. They dragged me out by my braids, said I was the devil's seed, beat me, said I had the eyes of a liar and the blood of a traitor. Then they strung me up and left me there for a message. Silas's throat closed. All this time he'd wondered what had been done to her. Now he wished he hadn't asked. I didn't think anyone would come, she whispered. Didn't even cry for help. I figured if my people weren't alive, then maybe I didn't belong anywhere. Silas reached for her hand slowly, letting her choose. She didn't pull away. My sister, he said softly, was only 16. Apache raiders hit our ranch 5 years back, burned it to the ground. I was out hunting. Came back to smoke and ash and screams. I heard her crying in the barn, but I didn't go in. I waited. I was scared. By the time I found the courage, she was gone. Willa looked at him, then really looked eyes sharp, not out of judgment but recognition. Two people carrying ghosts. I've hated your people, Silas admitted. For years, for what happened, for what I let happen. Willa didn't flinch. And I've hated yours. He nodded. But we're still here, she added, still breathing. That must mean something. The windmill groaned behind them. Silas rose, walked inside, and returned with a bundle wrapped in oilcloth. He unwrapped it to reveal the wooden sign he had found nailed to the cottonwood, "White man, don't forgive." I should have burned this the first night, he said, voice raw. But part of me believed it. Willa stared at the words for a long time, then stood, taking the sign into her arms like a fallen banner. Let's do it together, she said. They carried it to the fire pit, doused it in oil, and set it alight. The flames rose high, licking the night sky, devouring the letters. They stood side by side, watching as hate turned to ash. When the fire burned low, Silas turned to her. You ever think of leaving? Willa nodded. Every day. I'd take you, if you wanted. She hesitated. There's a place my mother spoke of past the southern ridges, where the people live free under no flags. But the road there, it's not easy. Silas smiled, sad but certain. Neither are we. And for the first time she smiled too. Not just with her mouth, but her whole face, eyes glinting like the stars returning to the sky. They didn't kiss that night. There was no rush. But something unspoken passed between them, something heavy and beautiful. Two souls once hunted now, bound not by guilt or fear, but by truth and the roots of blood and memory that refused to die. The sun was barely up when Silas Rowan cinched the saddle on his mare, the chill of dawn still clinging to the edges of the land. Ayesha Willa, no more, stood at the threshold of the cabin wrapped in a blanket, her braided hair resting on one shoulder. Behind her, the modest room they'd shared for weeks lay stripped of anything but memory. The choice had been made. The world would not let her be not here. And Silas, for all his silence and scars, would not let her face it alone. They left before the wind picked up, taking only what they could carry: dried meat, water, matches, and hope. Their destination was the Sierra Madre Range, far to the southland whispered about by the old ones, where Apaches still roamed free, far from the flags of blue or gray. To get there, they had to cross the Red Knife Canyon, a jagged scar that carved its way through the desert like a warning etched by fire. By midday, the terrain turned rough. The brush thickened the rock sharper. Ayesha rode beside him now, no longer the hollow-eyed girl he'd cut from a tree, but a woman carved by loss and held together by quiet will. She hadn't spoken much since they left, but every glance between them said more than words. He trusted her sense of direction, and she trusted his pace. The silence between them wasn't empty, it was full of breath dust and purpose. That night, they camped beside a dry creek bed. Silas built a fire with care, shielding it from view with stacked stones. Ayesha drew her coat tighter and stared into the flames, her face lit orange and gold. He handed her a piece of jerky, and for a while they ate in silence. "How long have you known about the canyon?" she asked suddenly, her voice rough from travel. "Since before I built the ranch," he replied. "Used to hear stories, how the wind screams through it like it remembers everyone who fell." Ayesha nodded. "My grandfather said the canyon eats cowards." Silas raised an eyebrow. "Then, I reckon we better not flinch." She looked over at him, the hint of a smile breaking the tired set of her face. "I'm not afraid of the canyon," she said. "I'm afraid of what's waiting on the other side." Silas didn't answer right away. He fed more wood into the fire, listening to it crackle. "Whatever it is," he finally said, "we'll face it on our feet. Together." The next morning brought a haze of smoke on the horizon, not natural, not distant. Silas watched the dark plume with narrowed eyes. Ayesha didn't ask what it meant. She knew. Riders, posses, maybe even the cavalry. Word had gotten out, and they weren't chasing gold. They were chasing justice, twisted by fear. They reached the edge of Red Knife Canyon by midday. The gorge split the earth like a wound 200 feet deep, with stone ledges that jutted and folded like broken teeth. There was a path, a narrow trail of switchbacks used long ago by buffalo and men with nowhere else to go. Ayesha dismounted, first patting her horse's neck. "We lead them down." Silas tied his reins tight and followed her lead. The descent was brutal. Dust slid beneath their boots. The horses struggled to keep balance. Twice Ayesha reached back to steady Silas when the path crumbled beneath him. Once he caught her by the waist as she slipped, and for a second their eyes met with the full gravity of what this meant: no way back, only forward or down. At the halfway point, they paused on a ledge wide enough for both to rest. The wind rose, then whipping through the canyon like a voice. "Do you hear it?" Ayesha asked, her eyes scanning the horizon. Silas nodded. "It's angry." "No," she said softly. "It's warning us." Then faint but real, the echo of hoofbeats. Above them. Fast. Silas moved to the edge, peering up. Shadows moved along the canyon's rim. Men. Armed. They followed, he muttered. Ayesha's breath caught. "We can't go back." "No," he said. "We go down." The last stretch was chaos. The horses bucked against the slope. Bullets cracked against stone above. Silas felt one slice past his shoulder. He grit his teeth and pulled his mare forward. Ayesha's horse stumbled a rock, slicing its leg, but she urged it on with whispered strength. At the canyon's bottom they found a narrow ravine, hidden shaded full of whispering sage and red fern. They ran through it, leading the horses deeper, until the sounds of pursuit grew muffled by stone. They didn't stop until the sky turned purple, and the world behind them felt like a different life. They collapsed beside a trickling spring, both shaking from exhaustion and adrenaline. Silas leaned back, clutching his side. Blood soaked through his shirt. Ayesha crawled to him, hands trembling. "You're hit." He nodded. "Just a graze." "You're lying." "Probably." She ripped a piece of her shirt and pressed it against the wound. Her touch was urgent but careful. He gritted his teeth and let her work. "You saved me again," she whispered. He caught her gaze, voice rough. "No, you let us through." They sat there, darkness settling like a second skin. The horses stood nearby, steam rising from their flanks. Ayesha leaned into him. "We made it across." Silas nodded. "But we're not free yet." She rested her head on his shoulder. "We're closer." And for the first time since the tree, since the fire, since the noose, she let herself hope. Not for safety, but for the chance to belong. Silas pulled her closer, his voice barely above the wind. "As long as you keep walking, I'll keep walking beside you." Behind them, the canyon whispered its rage into the wind. But ahead, the desert opened wide, waiting for two souls who refused to be buried where the hate had tried to kill them. The sun rose over the Sierra Madre foothills, casting gold across a stretch of untamed land where the dust no longer carried the weight of pursuit. Silas Rowan and Ayesha stood near the banks of a narrow stream, their horses tethered under a copse of mesquite trees. Weeks had passed since they'd crossed the canyon, and though the scars on Silas's side had yet to fade, he walked stronger now. Ayesha moved beside him steady as shadow her eyes sharper, her voice less like wind and more like thunder wrapped in silk. They had found refuge in a place spoken of in whispers, an Apache settlement hidden within the folds of earth and rock where the government's maps ran dry. Here, they weren't fugitives or ghosts. They were strangers, but not intruders. The people had watched them for days before speaking their trust measured in silence, not words. When Ayesha finally spoke her name aloud, using the tongue of her mother, an old woman with silver braids took her hand and nodded once. That was the beginning. Silas worked where he could, mending fences, gathering wood, tending animals. He didn't understand the language, but he understood gesture, understood labor. And in return, the people offered food, shelter, and space. Ayesha reconnected with the roots she had buried beneath years of survival. The songs she had nearly forgotten returned in fragments stitched together by firelight and memory. One evening, while smoke from the cooking fire curled into the twilight, she sat cross-legged by a stone ring and painted her family's emblem onto a strip of hide, and eagle wings ablaze rising. Silas watched her from a distance, a quiet reverence in his gaze. When she finished, she handed it to him. "This was my father's," she said. It belonged to him long before he met my mother, before they called him a traitor for loving her." Silas ran his fingers across the symbol. "Then I'll carry it like it's mine." Ayesha smiled, not just with her mouth, but with her whole body, like the pain she had carried was finally exhaling. A week later, a rider came to the edge of the settlement, dusty worn, wearing no badge, no uniform. He carried news. A town 10 miles east had posted bounties again. A woman with Apache blood last seen fleeing Red Knife Canyon. Word was spreading louder than before. "They won't stop," Silas said that night. They sat by the fire, his hand resting over hers. Not while the old lies still burn in their throats. Ayesha didn't flinch. "Then we tell the truth louder." The decision came not in anger but clarity. They would not run again. Instead, they would build. Not just for themselves, but for others like them, those caught between borders, between bloodlines, between the stories written by the powerful and the ones buried beneath sand. They moved farther south, deeper into the mountains to a valley where wildflowers bloomed even through the drought. With the help of the Apache, they built a small lodge from cedar and stone. It had no lock, no fence, just wide windows, a low roof, and a garden where Ayesha planted herbs her mother once sang to. Silas carved a bench beneath the elder tree and strung a wind chime from iron and bone. At night, the sound danced with the coyote's call. People came, not many but enough. A runaway boy with a scar over his brow, a woman carrying her child and the ashes of her husband, a soldier who no longer believed in his orders. They came and they stayed, because fire does not only destroy it, warms it, lights it, protects. One morning, Ayesha stood at the edge of the bluff watching the horizon. Her belly had begun to swell beneath her dress, a secret she had shared with Silas in the quiet of the night, his hand pressed gently to her skin. "She'll have your eyes," he'd said. "She'll have her own," she whispered back. "But she'll know where she comes from." Ayesha's fingers brushed the beads around her neck, prayer beads her mother once wore scorched in the fire, but never lost. She whispered a blessing to the wind, not in fear, but in gratitude, for survival, for strength, for the chance to begin again. Behind her, Silas approached with a cup of wild tea steam curling into the morning air. He handed it to her, their fingers grazing. "You think she'll like it here?" he asked. "She won't just like it," Ayesha said. "She'll grow here, like the fireweed." He nodded, looking over the land they now called home. "Then we plant more." They stood together, the light warming their skin. The silence between them filled not with sorrow, but with promise. "When the fire blooms," Ayesha murmured, "it means the land is healing." Silas smiled, his voice low and certain. "Then let it burn bright." And so in a place the world tried to erase, two people rooted in blood, and memory found something the maps forgot, a future. Not perfect, not safe, but real. And that was more than enough. A week after the lodge sprang to life beside the river, a storm rolled in out of nowhere. Dark clouds chased the desert wind across the mountains, and the Apache elders whispered warnings about bad air and bad luck. Silas felt at first a gathering pressure in his chest, and Ayesha recoiling from the wind as though she sensed something unsaid. That night, a messenger arrived from the little town east of the canyon. He rode with haste and worry. Silas met him in the whispering reeds. They tracked the child, the man panted. They came for what you've built. They know you're here." Silas felt Ayesha's arm slide into his, her eyes wide in the torchlight. The child, the promise of new life they'd thought they protected her. But a white flag flew above the messenger's stead. An official pardon, signed by the governor himself, lifted the bounty on Ayesha's head. Yet, in the same breath, the pardon declared, "You will surrender the minor child remaining in your care as guarantee until further notice." Silas's world tilted. Ayesha's breath caught. They turned to one another, the windmill creaking mournfully in the background, no longer a lullaby but an alarm bell. The next hours were a storm in themselves. Some of their few neighbors' brothers from neighboring Apache bands argued about retreating, hiding, or negotiating. The child's name, never spoken until now, seemed potent enough to draw soldiers to their door. By dawn, armed men on horseback rode through mesquite and sage toward the lodge. Their leader, a man in blue with a brimmed hat and a tight-lipped face, dismounted and strode forward, eyes searching. Silas stepped ahead, calm but rigid. "You have a pardon," Silas said, "but they demand the child." The soldier's eyes flicked to Ayesha, who held her daughter close at her side. "It's court order," he replied. "Your order hurts the wrong people," Silas said, voice low. Ayesha's daughter whimpered, a small braid of black hair catching the early light. Silas gently lifted her, exposing the hurricane beneath that calm surface. Ayesha steadied her daughter, voice steady but fierce. "This child is Apache. She lives free or she lives fighting." Two riders flanked their leader. They raised rifles. Ayesha's daughter gave a soft cry and reached for her mother's face. Silas's heart raced. Without words, they made a decision. Ayesha slipped into the lodge and returned with the eagle painting still framed in cedar. She held it high. "This is her heritage, not a guarantee. If you take her from me, you take the soul of her people." The soldier frowned. "Orders are orders." Silas squared his shoulders. "Then kill me first." Rifles wavered. Soldiers exchanged glances. In that moment, the windmill gave one final groan, and the skies cracked open with rain. The storm swept across the plain, rattling rifles, whipping men off their horses. Chaos erupted. Silas grabbed Ayesha and their daughter and ran toward the shelter of the mesquite grove. The soldiers strained against wind and rain, their formation breaking. By the time the sky cleared, Silas stood over their daughter's cradle in a hidden hollow of red rock. Ayesha's wild hair sparkled with raindrops. Their daughter slept untouched and unharmed, as if storms were not born for them. He offered Ayesha a trembling smile. "They won't return, not in waves like that again." She looked at him, eyes shining with fear and triumph. "We're learning what it means to fight." She shifted their daughter into his arms. Silas lowered his head. "We'll rebuild, but we'll root what they can't reach." They walked back to the lodge hours later, their coats heavy with rain and resolve. The men who had come to enforce the law were gone, their horses scattered across sagebrush. The governor's pardon lay untouched by the door. Inside, the Apache elders gathered around Ayesha, offering blankets, herbs, prayers. The child's stirred eyes fluttering open, and Ayesha touched her forehead gently. Silas joined them in a circle that had no room for fear anymore, only resolve. Scarred by past violence, they chose a new path to build a life where love outweighed hate and fire bloomed only in transformation. Thank you for riding with us through this new chapter. where mercy, memory, and courage collide beneath dust and storm. If this unexpected turn moved you, please subscribe to Wild West Love Stories and help us bring more tales of resilience, redemption, and unbreakable love from the frontier. Your support gives us the strength to keep telling stories where hope rides farther than fear. Ride steady, love deep, and be part of the journey.